I'm Eric, I'm Mike's son, and I was going to just give you a sketch of the biographical details of his life, for those of you who don't already know, with a little color added in. My dad was born on the 21st of September 1934. You may or may not have noticed, out in the dining room area, there are a couple of newspaper pages that have been replicated and blown up. They're actually for the day after my father's birth, which is the 22nd, of course. And the reason I got curious about doing that was he told a story, which I was happy to confirm is true, which is that he became a devout fan as a child of the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team. And on the day he was born, the Cardinals played a doubleheader in Brooklyn, New York against the Brooklyn Dodgers, won both games by shutout, and in the two winning pitchers were the brothers Dizzy and Paul Dean. Okay? Dizzy Dean was a Hall of Famer, famous pitcher. His younger brother had a lot of talent, didn't last very long in the league. But anyway, on that day, the story he loved to tell was how Dizzy Dean pitched the first game of the the first game of the doubleheader, pitched a shutout, allowed 3 hits. Excellent job by anybody's standards. And in the nightcap, the second game of the doubleheader, along came his brother Paul, who pitched a no-hit game. Okay, and that was the first no-hit game in 10 years, as the headline banners in there, if you'd like to look at what the Post-Dispatch was talking about, in addition to the Little Lindbergh case in September of 1934. So anyway, that made him a really devout, well, not that event, but growing up in St. Louis, and then even after he moved away to Ohio when he was 9, lived there till he was 15 and moved to Houston, Texas. And he maintained his Cardinals fanaticism all through that time. And 1949 collected every Bowman baseball card, most of them in 1950. And they still exist, and they're in a safe deposit box. And evidently they're mine to keep. But he really enjoyed baseball his entire life. I mean, all the way, the very last days of his life. You could count on him watching the Dodgers, watching the Angels, having the ball game on. We came to see him only a couple of weeks before he passed away. Dodger game was on. We're sitting around his bed talking to him, and I suddenly said, "Hey, a Dodger just hit a grand slam home run." And he kind of mumbled something I didn't quite hear. I said, "What was that again?" He said, "Who hit the grand slam?" It was Corey Seager, the wonderful young shortstop. The Dodgers, I know some of you may know, have been winning an astounding number of games this year. My dad graduated from high school in 1952 in Houston, Texas. Went on to the University of Houston. A few of you may have noticed that there are a couple of University of Houston yearbooks that cover the period when he was there. He was named a student to, what was it called? He was in the who's who of students. I believe it was his senior year. He was the editor of the University of Houston newspaper, and of course that led him to a career in journalism. The thing he always loved the best, which was he went to work for the Houston Post. He worked there, worked his way up at different times. Started out on obituaries. Absolutely. That's where everybody started. He emphasized this. He had no choice. He had to start there. He worked his way up, and eventually, by the time he left the Houston Post in 1967, he was night sports editor. But in that time, the amusing thing is, he had gotten so disgusted with the pay level that he had on several occasions said, "I got to quit this and go work in a job that actually pays me something." So he left and worked at about 3 or 4 different other boring entities like the Schlumberger Corporation and an advertising agency. And it was the easiest thing in the world again to come back to the Houston Post. And the people he used to work with would just know after a while they could just start recruiting Mike and he'd come back. So he left and came back about 3 or 4 times. until we moved to California, and he went to work for IBM. Later had a long time, which he really loved, as a freelance writer, editor, mostly doing stuff for IBM. And sorry? And typesetter. Yes, exactly. Don't forget the typesetter for the Brain Mind Bulletin, which was the entity that he created with my mother, Marilyn, in 1975. And when they divorced... Correct. I'm sorry, I'm leaving out details. They had collaborated on a book in the late 60s. When they split in 1978, my mother, it was a very simple administrative situation. My mother kept the business, the Brain Mind Bulletin, and my dad kept the house. But he continued to do the typesetting work for Brain Mind Bulletin. I am not entirely sure why, because it exasperated him no end for the next 20 years, but he did. And, exactly. And throughout the time when I was working there, he was still there, carrying the flag, doing the hard work, editing stuff, and getting me to rewrite stuff that wasn't, usually in my case, had not been written as well as it could. Anyway, many of you know him from his love for music, which dates back to his very early years. I know when I was a kid, the big thing then that he shared with me was the ragtime music. And that was something he had loved long before the movie The Sting came along and brought it back into the public consciousness. So I spent many afternoons in my early years, even preteen years, going with him to the Maple Leaf Club in Santa Monica to listen to live music, ragtime in particular. Once he even motivated me, shall we say, to actually get up and play a piece. You were there? See, I don't even know. Really? I had a crowd. Yeah. It wasn't good. Anyway, that was his love, and then, of course, the Dixieland all through his life, and his greatest joy in all the years he had of, kind of freedom and ease was to travel around, be with the people that he loved, listen to the music that he loved. It was, something that carried him all the way through. I have a few things that just quirks about my dad that are kind of, they stick with me. About my dad being a man of predictability. One of those is in terms of attire. Had he come here on this day, the chance that he would have worn anything other than dressy-looking pants and a button-up shirt are 0%. And a sweat, well,
yes.
I thought of all the things I can say never about with my dad. And I never saw him. I never saw him in a t-shirt. No. I never saw him in short pants. I never saw him in white socks. I never saw him in tennis shoes. I never saw him with a hat on his entire life, except for the night of October, well, I should remember the date, but I don't. It's October 2002, the night that the Angels won the World Series. And I had an Angels hat, and I said, we're taking a picture, and you're putting on the Angels hat. So we saw that picture, and that is the only photograph I know of. I guess he had to wear one in the Army, but that's about it.
Well, he was wearing a fireman's cap in the drawing.
His dad wore hats all the time. And the other thing that marked him was his endless mentality as a newspaperman, an editor, and proofreader. And so throughout his adult life, he never stopped noticing and wanting to correct mistakes that were made in English, and that included mistakes made in the Los Angeles Times. And he was famous for taking the Los Angeles Times, circling the errors, sending them to whoever it may concern at the Los Angeles Times.
That's awesome.
Which ended up making him actually a friend of the LA Times. He made a good friend of a man named Fred Holly, who was an editor of the LA Times. And Fred Holly was so taken with my dad, and they had such a good time talking about language and newspapers. He ended up inviting him down to lunch, down at kind of like a newsroom lunch, and they went to this place across the street from the LA Times, and he was surrounded by news people. And he came back and said, "Boy, that was wonderful." He goes, "Boy, those are really my people. That's really my." And so the last thing I'll leave you with was something that just amused the heck out of me, which is that my dad